let's talk a little bit about egress costs, the dilemma there, and is there a way for for engineering leaders or heads of function to escape egress costs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's define what egress is for folks. Egress is simply the traffic that leaves your cloud environment. So when you're serving a web page or a large image or a video, you as the owner of that cloud account pay for the bytes that leave the cloud. Ironically enough, you don't pay for the bytes that come into the cloud. And there's like a financial reason why cloud operators do that. So they make it very attractive to bring data in and very difficult to bring data out. So I always use the Hotel California analogy there. And the reason they do that, why are they doing that? Are they doing that to make money? Are they doing that for other reasons? I would argue that the cloud is already highly profitable business. Egress is not going to make or break the day for clouds. The reason why they do this strategically, in my opinion, it's almost like a monopolistic behavior to try to prevent easy migration between cloud environments. Because think about it, Patrick. If all of these clouds have similar capabilities, what's if there is no natural barrier to exit? What's to stop you from kind of fluctuating your workloads easily between cloud environments as features come up, as important architectures emerge in a different cloud, or something is cheaper? So there's a natural tendency to say, well, we're not all the same. We're not a commodity. We actually have a lot of value add. And this is one mechanism for a lock-in process for these clouds. And notice how none of them are really taking those costs down significantly. They all are running on these extremely high gross margins, and nobody's budging on the number. These three entities are behaving like an oligopoly in many constructs. I am not a proponent of government involvement in most things, but I think this is one where we need to take a closer look and see if there's some type of legislative remedy that might force these guys to play in a more open playing field.
Some really, really big implications, because I'm thinking, like there's the design principle, or like the sales principle of like, if you want to like decrease cancellations on your membership, you introduce friction into the system. And so you see a lot of these like more like B2C oriented companies, like where you have to cancel your subscription by sending an email versus like clicking a button. And so it just never occurred to me that like the version of that for cloud companies was introducing big egress costs for the migration of data out of the system.
It's interesting because it's actually kind of worse than that. Like they'll send you an appliance to bring your data in. So they'll send you like terabytes of disks that you can plug into local storage and then upload it all and ship them a physical appliance to bring the data in, make it super easy, right? But Patrick, let me just give you the math. Cloud providers buy their bandwidth from ISPs like Level 3 used to be a big one, Telstra. There are many others that they buy their bandwidth from, and they buy it based on this metric called megabits per second, right? So when I was buying bandwidth, it was at $1, and I wasn't buying in volume compared to these guys by any means, right? So let's imagine the price is $1, just to be generous. The current list price on AWS is 9 cents a gigabyte, which equates to $30. So they're paying $1 and they're charging 30. That's not an 80% gross margin. That is an obscene markup. That's 30x markup on cost. And that's the piece that I feel is unfair. And that's the piece that I feel is vendor lock-in. But we want to go back to your question on what can you do about it? Like what can I and I've seen engineering teams go to extremes to get away from these egress costs. Some of them are unhealthy behaviors. I'll give you an example of a couple of healthy things that you can do, and then I'll give you an example of some things that are just taking it to an extreme. So one of the things that cloud providers charge egress for is what's called cross availability zone traffic. So as the best practice for high availability, the clouds say, well, you should replicate your application in the same region, but at least across a couple of availability zones, because that's like 100-mile separation between data centers. If there's a disaster, we still have your back. That's great, but they still charge for that traffic. It's not the same as to the public internet, but they still charge for inner AZ traffic. That's a problem. So what are some of the things that you can do? Well, you can use caching, back to that kind of, and there are great services like Akamai and Cloudflare and Fastly. These are all CDNs, so content delivery networks that allow you to cache static and dynamic content at the edge of their network, where you're paying a fraction of the price for egress. So your egress between the caching service and the cloud is minimal. And then a lot of the traffic just happens at the edge, which creates a faster user experience for end users and lowers your costs of egress. And like, for example, Cloudflare has this thing called the bandwidth alliance, right, which is an attempt to lower your overall egress costs because they've created deals with different cloud providers. I'll give you one more good tip. If you're doing a lot of egress between your physical on-premise infrastructure and the cloud, each cloud provider has an offering. Sometimes it's called Fast Connect or Direct Connect, but it's basically you buy a layer 2 or a layer 3 fiber connection that you now get charged, instead of 9 cents a gigabyte, you get charged at 1.5 cents a gigabyte or 2 cents a gigabyte. So it significantly reduces the egress if you're doing a lot of traffic between on-premise and your cloud environment.